Hi, you guys. Welcome to Math this morning. Today's lesson is solving a system of equations. So when we solve a system of equations using graphing, we graph the two lines on the same coordinate plane and we see where they cross. When we solve a system of equations using substitution, we're still trying to figure out where the two lines cross each other at, and that will give us our solution, but we do it using another method. So instead of graphing, we use substitution. Okay, so when you use substitution, the way that this works is you're going to be given two equations. And so you solve one of the equations for one of the variables, then you substitute the expression obtained in step number 1 into the other equation, solve the resulting equation, and then you substitute the value of the variable found in step 2 into the equivalent equation from step 1 and solve for the other variable. Now, I know this sounds really tricky, but let me show you how this works. And it's really not tricky at all if you follow those 3 steps. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to write our two equations side by side. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to solve one of the equations for one of the variables, and you get to pick. When you're doing this step, make sure you make a good choice. So take a minute and look at your two equations and pick something that will be easy to solve for. Okay, so this x right here, it's already a 1x. So it's going to be really easy to solve this equation for x. To get the x by itself, all I have to do is to add 2y, which I'm going to do that to both sides. So x equals 8 plus 2y. Now, once I have solved one of the equations for one of the variables, I'm going to make a substitution for that variable in the other equation. Okay, so I'm going to replace x in, we'll call this the first equation and this the second equation. So I'm going to replace x in the first equation with this. Okay, so let me show you how this works. We write the first equation just like it is, but instead of the x, we're going to make a substitution. Okay, so instead of the x, I am going to plug in 8 plus 2y. Now, what that does for me is it gives me an equation I can solve. You can see that this equation now just has one variable. So in the beginning, we were given two equations that both had two variables, and we weren't able to solve either one of them without having a variable in our answer. And so when we make a substitution, we now have an equation that we can solve for one of the variables. Okay, so just to review, first step is to write your two equations side by side. Second step is to solve one of the equations for one of the variables. We know that having an x or having an 8 plus 2y, that is equal. That's the same, okay? So x is equal to this. So that means that in our first equation, instead of the x, we can plug in the 8 plus 2y because we know that 8 plus 2y and x are equal. Okay, so from there we're going to solve. Remember when you solve an equation and you have a number in front of the parentheses, that number has to first get distributed to both terms inside the parentheses. So 4 times 8 is 32. 4 times 2y is 8y plus 1y equals 14. Okay, now I'm going to continue solving this equation for the y. You can notice that on the left side, we can still simplify this. We can combine the 8y and the 1y. Okay, this is really just a 1y. So that's going to be 9y plus 32 equals 14. So I'm going to go ahead and move to another slide where I have some more room. 9 times y plus 32 equals 14. Now from here, I'm solving for the y. I'm trying to get the y by itself, so I would minus 32 from both sides. So 9 times y equals, when you take 14 and you minus 32, you get a negative 18. Please use your calculators, okay? Make sure that you do your operations correctly. And then to get rid of the multiplication of 9, we would use division. So y equals negative 2. So now let's go back to our original screen. We now know that y equals negative 2. So in order to find an ordered pair that's our solution, we need an x value and we need a y value. We know that our y value is negative 2. Okay, so the way that we find our x value is we go back to this equation right here. We already solved for the x. We know that the x is equal to 8 plus 2 times whatever the y is. So we make a substitution. We know that the y is negative 2. So 8 plus negative 4 is 4. So when the y is negative 2, the x is 4. So this is the solution to our system. Okay, we know that if we were to graph these two lines on the same coordinate plane, that they would cross right here at 4, negative 2. And we found that by using the substitution method instead of graphing. So let's go ahead and try another one of these. I know there are lots of steps to keep track of. Okay, so we're just going to keep practicing a few together until you get this. So the next one, 3x plus y equals 10, y equals 6x plus 1. First step is you're going to take and write the two equations side by side. Okay, and then you're going to solve one of the equations for one of the variables. So that means you just need to pick an equation. You need to get one of the variables all by itself. Okay, so this is equation 1, this is equation 2. And you see that in equation 2, the y has already been solved for. We know that y is equal to 6x plus 1. So having a y or having a 6x plus 1, that is like having the same thing. Okay, so we're going to use that information and we're going to make a substitution into the first equation so that we have an equation with just one variable we can solve. Okay, so we take equation number 1, we write it just like it is. Okay, but instead of this y right here, we're going to plug in our 6x plus 1. Okay, and now we have an equation that just has an x, so we can solve it for the x. Let's simplify this left side by combining the 3x and 6x. We can make that 9x plus 1 equals 10. From there, we just have a two-step equation. So to get this x by itself, we're going to minus 1 from both sides. 9 times x equals 9. Divide by 9 on both sides. X equals 1. Okay, so once we have solved this equation for the x, we're now going to figure out what our y is. So we go back to this equation right here because we know that y is equal to 6 times whatever x is plus 1. Okay, so far we know that our x is 1. So we're trying to solve for our y. Okay, we want to find an ordered pair where these two lines cross each other at. So we take y equals 6 times, instead of the x, we're going to plug in 1. 6 times 1 is 6. 6 plus 1 is 7. Y equals 7. So when we let the x be 1, the y is 7. We know that these two lines right here cross each other at 1, 7. And we found that by using substitution instead of graphing. Okay, let's go ahead and try another example. So in this example, we have negative x plus 5y equals 3 and negative 3x plus 5y equals 9. So let's go ahead and put these two equations side by side and use substitution to solve. Okay, so if we want to use substitution to solve, we need to solve one of the equations for one of the variables. This one's not as easy as the other ones. I do think after looking at both of them, the easiest choice would probably be to get this x right here all by itself. Okay, right now it is a negative 1 times by x plus 5y equals 3. So to get this x all by itself, we're going to minus 5y from both sides. So we have negative 1 times by x equals 3 minus 5 times by y. And then I'm going to divide everything by negative 1. So x equals negative 3 plus 5. Negative 5 divided by negative 1 is a positive 5y. Okay, so now that I have the x all by itself, I'm going to replace that in the other equation with this expression, negative 3 plus 5y. Okay, so let's take the other equation. So this is equation number 1. So we solved for x in equation number 1. We're going to replace the x in equation number 2. Okay, so let's go ahead and write our equation just like it is, except for that x. We're going to make a substitution there. Okay, so notice that everything about the equation number 2 stays the same. Negative 3 times by, instead of x, we're going to make a substitution, and we add 5y equals 9. Okay, so we plug this in, negative 3 plus 5y. Okay, now let's go ahead and solve equation number 2. So if there's a number in front of a parenthesis, it has to get distributed to both terms inside the parenthesis. Negative 3 times negative 3 is 9, plus negative 3 times negative 5y is negative 15y, plus 15y equals 9. Okay, let's go ahead and simplify this left side. We know that we can combine a negative 15y and a positive 15y, and that leaves us with 9. 9 does equal 9. Okay, but I want you to notice that our variable dropped out completely. There is no variable left. And when we simplified, we were left with an equation that is true. 9 equals 9. Okay, so remember that when we were graphing to solve a system of equations, there was 3 things that could happen. Okay, the lines could cross at one point. Okay, and that gave us one solution. It gave us an ordered pair of where the 2 lines crossed each other at. The 2 lines could cross at 0 points. Okay, so remember, if the 2 lines were parallel, if they had the same slope, they never crossed each other at all. Okay, and so in that situation, there was no solution. And then the third situation is where they crossed at every point, where they were the same line. Okay, and this would be infinitely many solutions. Okay, so when you're solving a system of equations, you don't actually get to see the graph of the lines. Okay, so what you need to look for This one is if you're able to solve the equation and you get both an x and a y, you know they cross at one point. Okay? When you're solving a system of equations and your variable drops out and you're left with a statement that is not true, that is going to be no solution. That means that the two lines never cross each other. Okay? And if you're solving by substitution and your variable drops out and you're left with a statement that is true, you know that you are talking about the same line. Okay, so let's go back here. Negative x plus 5y equals 3 and negative 3x plus 5y equals 9. These equations are really just the same, aren't they? Except for this one got multiplied by 3 on everything. Okay, so when we were solving by substitution, our variables dropped out. We were left with a statement that was true. So we know that these really are the same line. If we were to graph them on the coordinate plane, we would see they're the same line. So this would be infinitely many solutions. Okay, let's go ahead and try another one. Y equals 2x plus 1 and negative 2x plus y equals 5. So if I want to solve this using substitution, I'm going to put both of these equations side by side. I'm going to solve one of the equations for one of the variables. We can see that the first equation has already been solved for the y. The y is already all by itself, isn't it? Y is equal to 2x plus 1. So having a y or having a 2x plus 1 is exactly the same. So now, because this variable has already been solved for, we're going to replace the y in the other equation with this 2x plus 1. So negative 2x plus, instead of the y, we're going to make a substitution. Okay, when we simplify this left side, negative 2x plus 2x, that cancels out. We're left with 1 equals 5, which is not true. So we know that this system of equations has no solution. Okay, and I want you to look at these two equations. Y equals 2x plus 1. This one's already in slope-intercept form. Okay, we know that it crosses the y-axis at 1 and it has a slope of 2. If we take the other equation, let me clear off some space here. If we take this other equation, negative 2x plus y equals 5, and put it into slope-intercept form by adding 2x to both sides, y equals 2x plus 5. We can see that these two lines have the same slope. And anytime two lines have the same slope, they're going to be parallel lines and they will never cross each other. Okay, so that's why we know there is no solution. There's no point that is on both this line and this line. Okay, so let's go ahead and practice one more of these, and then I would like you to join me in the breakout room. I know that solving by substitution is a really hard thing, and so we can practice some more of these together. So I'm going to go ahead and give you one more example. Let's just do this one right here, number 2. So B equals negative 4a plus 5. And a minus b equals 5. Okay, so on this one, they just changed up the variables. You're still using substitution to solve this system of equations. Okay, so in order to do that, this is our equation number 1. This is our equation number 2. Okay, we want to find the value of a and the value of b. okay? So we want to solve one of the equations for one of the variables. When you look here, can you see that this b is already all by itself? Okay, equation number 1 has already been solved for the b. We know that the b is equal to negative 4a plus 5. So that means we're going to replace the b in the other equation. So let's write the other equation just like it is. It's a minus, instead of the b, we're going to make a substitution. Okay? Instead of the b, we're going to plug in negative 4a plus 5. And now we have an equation that we can solve for the a. Okay? Remember that if there is a minus sign in front of a parentheses, you have to distribute that to both terms inside the parentheses. So negative times negative 4a is positive 4a. Negative times 5 is a negative 5. And then we still have our a, we still have our equal to 5. From there, we can simplify this left side. We can combine these two terms. A plus 4a is 5a. So 5 times a minus 5 equals 5. Then we would add 5 to both sides. So 5 times a equals 10. Divide by 5 on both sides, and a equals 2. Sorry, I'm kind of running out of room here. So on this one, we know our a is 2. And to solve for our b, we go back to the beginning. We know that b is equal to negative 4 times by whatever a is, plus 5. We now know that our a is 2. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 plus 5 is negative 3. Okay, so in this situation, we know that the solution to this system right here is that the a needs to be 2 and the b needs to be negative 3. Okay? So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and pull up your quiz. For those of you who are ready to take your quiz, you can do that. Let me help you with this just a little bit. So the first one says, which ordered pair is a solution of the system? So you're picking which of these is a solution, okay? Remember that the solution is the ordered pair that gives you an x value and a y value that make both equations true, okay? So to figure this one out, you're going to have to plug 1 in for the x and 9 in for the y into both of these equations and see if that makes a true statement or not. Okay? If it does, you're lucky. You know that that is your solution. If it doesn't, you're going to have to go to B and plug 2 in for the x and 6 in for the y into both equations and see if it makes both equations true. If it does, you're lucky. If it doesn't, you're going to need to plug in 3, negative 1. Okay? If that doesn't work, you need to plug in 4, 0. Okay, remember you're looking for an ordered pair that when you replace the x and the y with the x and the y from the ordered pair in both equations, it makes both equations true. Okay? Use a calculator to do your operations. Take the time to get out a calculator and use it. Okay? So that's for the first one. You are just picking one solution. Okay, there's only one solution for this one. For the second one, use the substitution method to solve this system of equations. So you're going to put them side by side. Okay. And I actually gave you an easy one for your quiz. This is our equation 1, and this is our equation 2. Okay, so you can see that equation 2 has already been solved for the x. The x is all by itself. Okay, we know that x is equal to y plus 3. So having an x or having a y plus 3, that's exactly the same. So what you're going to do is you're going to take equation 1, okay, you're going to write it just like it is, except for instead of the x, you're going to plug in y plus 3, and then you're going to solve what you have left. Okay, so hopefully that was a good help for your quiz for those of you who are ready to do that. If you still need some more help, no worries. Meet me in the practice room. We'll do some more of these together. We can practice some just like your quiz. And one more thing that you need to know is that next week is the end of the block. Okay, so we're going to be having a test review on Monday, and then your test will be available. It's going to be the last test for this block. I have a lot of you who are working on earning your first semester credit back. This test is your final, and you need to pass the test in order to pass the class. Okay, so make sure you come to class on Monday. It's super important that you do the review first so that you're ready for the test. With that said, I hope that you have a really great day. And those of you that still need a little bit more help with this, I will see you in breakout room number 2.